It was the sort of autumnal afternoon that poets call melancholy, though in Lord Peter Wimsey's estimation it was simply damp. He had spent the better part of an hour debating the pronunciation of cloistered with a retired rector of uncompromising opinions, and now found himself, somewhat inexplicably, staring at a vegetable marrow that had been laid ceremoniously upon the library window-sill of Clenstone Hall, as though offered to the gods of agriculture, or sentimentally mourned by a lunatic. "Did the marrow scream, Bunter?" he inquired, adjusting his monocle to better inspect the thing's pallid waxen skin. "Not audibly, my lord," said Bunter, who had followed him into the room with the grave air of a man attending both a murder and a dinner engagement. "Though I am informed that Miss Vetch, the housekeeper, has lately taken to leaving her surplus gourds in sentimental locations." "Ah," said Lord Peter, "the displaced symbolism of the underemployed." "And the scream?" "From the cellar steps, my lord. Heard by young Miss Oakley. She was returning from evensong and claims she dropped her hymn book on the spot. The sort of religious terror that usually afflicts curates, not governesses," murmured Wimsey. "And what did our young Miss Oakley see, besides a ghost, a hound, or the tragic consequence of a well-lubricated staircase?" "Nothing, my lord. Only darkness, and the noise. Like a soul being throttled with its own guilt," she said, "which I understand is her phrasing, not the vicar's." Wimsey turned rather suddenly from the marrow. "Let us be dreadfully prosaic, Bunter. If it screamed, it was something living, and if it was living and now isn't, we may safely assume someone has helped it along." "Indeed, my lord. Mr. Duckworth, the gardener, has refused to go near the cellar since. Says it's something to do with the air. He mentioned miasma and was seen crossing himself. I thought Duckworth was a primitive Methodist. Evidently a pragmatic one." Lord Peter straightened, dusting off his hands. "Very well. When in doubt, investigate. Fetch a torch, Bunter, and tell Miss Vetch that if the marrow moves, she is to notify the bishop." The cellar steps of Clenstone Hall were of the usual sort, narrow, green-slimed, and faintly suggestive of rats with better education than the average member of Parliament. They descended steeply beneath the kitchen wing, which in itself bore the mournful air of a building unsure of its purpose since the Crimean War. Bunter held the torch. Wimsey, in a tweed coat rather too fine for crawling about after corpses, descended with the brisk cheer of a man hoping not to find one. Halfway down, the air changed. Noticeably. Not the dramatic chill of ghost stories, but something subtler. A hush, a heaviness, a scent that had once been onions and was now something darker. "Hold the light there, Bunter," Wimsey said, quietly. At the base of the steps, near the iron-studded door to the wine vault, something had indeed been dragged. The smears were faint but undeniable, dull, dark streaks along the flagstone, interrupted here and there by something like finger marks or claw scoring. A piece of fabric, black serge or some poor imitation thereof, clung to a rusty nail at the corner. "Lady's mourning dress," Wimsey observed. "Cheap, home-sewn. Possibly even a governess's Miss Oakley?" asked Bunter, lowering the torch as his master plucked the shred loose. "Possibly. Though if she was attacked, she's surprisingly vocal for a dead woman." Wimsey tilted his head. "Or do we think it was a decoy scream?" "A performance?" Bunter's brow creased. "But to what end, my lord?" "Ah, that's the trick, Bunter. Why cry wolf unless one has a wolf in reserve, and that, I think, is our marrow in the library. Come, let's question the vegetables." Upstairs, Miss Vetch had indeed taken to hovering in the doorway of the morning room, looking like a boiled owl with a penchant for lace collars. "I never said it was haunted, my lord," she sniffed, upon hearing the gist of their inquiry. "Only that things are not quite as they were. Since the master passed on, the late Colonel Forstall, yes," said Wimsey. "Found at the bottom of these same cellar steps, was he not?" "Yes, but that was last year. Coroner said it was an accident. He'd been drinking, and he'd often gone down into the cellar to— What? To shout, said Miss Vetch, without a hint of humour. He did it often. He'd stand at the bottom of the steps and shout. Names, sometimes. Orders. A poem once. That's why no one took much notice, until the dog found him. But the poor beast died not long after. Worms, they said. Lord Peter sat back in the uncomfortable armchair with an air of vague delight. Miss Vetch, how often do you misplace the decanter keys? Never, my lord. Even when shouting is involved. I am a housekeeper of 17 years, Lord Wimsey. I do not lose things. Then, perhaps, said Wimsey, eyes narrowing faintly, something else has been misplaced, or hidden, or buried. Bunter, I believe the cellar shall have our attention for the foreseeable future. And if you could ring for some tea, and perhaps a torch with fresh batteries, we may yet coax a few more ghosts into manifesting. Very good, my lord. And Miss Vetch, do be so good as to tell the cook to keep an eye on Miss Oakley. Governesses are terribly prone to flights of fancy, particularly when they've been reading the Brontes. Thus began the curious case of the cry from the cellar steps, a sound with no body, a house with too many closed doors, and a vegetable that would, in due course, become surprisingly relevant. Lord Peter Wimsey, smoothing his coat and polishing his monocle, had only one question on his mind. Why had the wine vault been locked from the inside? Lord Peter Wimsey lingered by the library fire after tea, absently turning the scrap of black serge between his fingers. The heat of the flames caught the sheen of the cheap cloth, as if coaxing it to yield secrets. Opposite him, Miss Oakley, pale, correct, and self-effacing in the manner peculiar to modern governesses, sat with her ankles neatly crossed and her gaze pinned to her lap. You were returning from evensong, Wimsey said, in the tone of a man recalling the details of an amusing opera. Do forgive me, Miss Oakley, but one must pin these things down like butterflies. You returned through the side entrance? Yes, Lord Wimsey. The kitchen door was unlatched, as it always is on Sundays. Mrs. Vetch insists on it for deliveries, though she won't allow it mentioned in front of the housekeeper from Blatchley Park. Competition, you see, how diverting. And the cry, this operatic note of distress, it occurred precisely when? She blinked. Just as I turned the corner. I'd passed the apple store and was coming down the path when I heard it. It was not like any human sound, quite. High and rasping. It echoed terribly, and nothing else. No shape, no movement. I thought I saw something at the bottom of the cellar steps. But I'd been reading Wuthering Heights again. I suppose it made me sensitive. Lord Peter smiled faintly. Then the Brontes may be both your accusers and your alibi. She flushed. I assure you I did not imagine it. Quite. I never suspect imagination when facts are so much more inconvenient. Tell me, was the door to the wine cellar ajar when you looked down? It was shut. Indeed. But when Bunter and I descended a mere 20 minutes later, it was firmly bolted from within. That's impossible, she said softly. Yes, he agreed. Deliciously so. She seemed on the verge of protesting again, but something in Wimsey's expression stopped her. She swallowed, lowered her eyes, and murmured, I'm sorry I caused trouble. No trouble at all. I always find trouble most instructive. You may return to your Brontes in peace, Miss Oakley, though perhaps you might consider Agnes Grey slightly less spectral. He stood and rang the bell lightly, as if summoning a footman in a house where none existed anymore. When the door opened, it was Miss Vetch again, stiff, upright, and bristling slightly with the proprietary tension of a housekeeper who senses the walls whispering things she's not been told. Miss Oakley will require nothing further this evening, Miss Vetch. Thank you. I wonder, could you direct me to Colonel Forstall's study? The late Colonel's, that is. The woman stiffened. It hasn't been opened since his death. Then it will have preserved his secrets like good Madeira. Please, I should like to see it. Reluctantly, she led him through a narrow corridor, past a curious oil portrait of a snarling spaniel with the eyes of a melancholy vicar, and stopped before a heavy oak door. "The key, if you please," said Whimsy. Miss Vetch hesitated, and then produced it from the depths of her apron. "I clean it once a fortnight," she said defensively. "Only dusting." Nothing else, Lord Peter bowed. "Then I am sure the ghosts have not had time to resent the intrusion." The room was small, panelled in dark wood, with a tall, multi-paned window looking out across the garden. A thick layer of dust lay on the blotter and the arms of the leather chair, but the air was not stale. Whimsy moved slowly, examining the paperweights, the inkstand, the cabinet of claret behind the desk. On the far wall stood a tall grandfather clock, stopped at 5:47. "Curious," he murmured. "Colonel Forstall died at approximately 9:30, according to the coroner. But this—" He trailed off and turned to the desk. A blotter pad, yellowed slightly, held an indentation where a page had once been torn away. Whimsy took a sheet of paper and a soft pencil from his coat pocket, ever the prepared amateur, and began to shade lightly. The ghost of a letter emerged. "You will not blackmail me again. This ends tonight. I shall come to the cellar myself." There was no signature. Whimsy's eyebrows lifted. He tapped the pencil against his lips, then bent to examine the carpet beneath the desk. There was a faint mark where something square had rested, perhaps a box or a small crate, and a subtle trail of woolenware leading to the panel beneath the window. He pressed the panel. Nothing happened. "Bunter," he said softly, as his valet materialized behind him, having entered without a sound. "Be so good as to bring the lamp closer. I believe there's something hidden here, behind the panel. A recess, perhaps." With a practiced hand, Bunter adjusted the lamp's light. Whimsy found a narrow seam along the baseboard. A few moments of delicate probing with his penknife produced a soft click, and the panel gave way. Inside was a small, narrow cavity, just wide enough to hide a ledger or a sheaf of papers. Empty now, but faintly visible in the dust lay a curled hair, pale auburn, fine as a child's. "Not the Colonel's," murmured Whimsy. "He was famously bald." He stood, brushing off his knees, and looked once more around the room. Someone came here after the Colonel's death. Perhaps recently. They removed something, letters perhaps, and didn't take care to cover their trail. Sloppy work. Very unlike Miss Vetch, Bunter said nothing, but the faint upward twitch of one eyebrow expressed silent agreement. "Let us speak to the gardener, Bunter." "Mr. Duckworth. He may be a man of the soil, but I suspect he sees more than he says." They found Duckworth at the rear of the potting shed, drinking tea with an expression of martyred resolve. "I says to the cook," he told them, "if the dead want to shriek, they ought to do it in decent hours. Not at twilight, when a man's still finishing his marrow trenching." Lord Peter sat down on an overturned seed tray. "Mr. Duckworth," he said genially, "you appear to be a man not easily surprised." Duckworth snorted. "I've worked this house 27 years, sir. I've seen the Colonel come home with blood on his cuffs from God knows where and ask for lemonade. I've seen Miss Vetch burn letters she never opened. I've seen that poor dog, what was his name? Hector, bark at empty air outside the wine vault. You ask me, the house knows what it's about. Just likes to remind us, now and then, did you hear anything yourself last night?" The man hesitated. A clatter. Metal on stone, like a pan dropped or a door forced. I was in the shed. Didn't think much of it at the time. "But you didn't go look?" Duckworth looked shifty. "Truth is, I thought it might be him again." "The Colonel. I've heard things down there before. Late at night. Murmurs. Once a laugh. Whimsy tilted his head. But the Colonel's been dead a year. Aye, said Duckworth, and that's what makes it worse. Whimsy stood. You've been most helpful. One last question. Has anyone else had access to the wine cellar since the Colonel died? No one. Miss Vetch kept the key, and she'd never let anyone down there alone. Splendid, said Whimsy. Then we know either she's lying or someone's been making ghosts in the dark. As they walked back toward the house, a light breeze swept down the gravel path. A weathercock spun once and stilled, its creak echoing faintly over the roof. Whimsy looked up at the windows of the west wing, narrowing his eyes. Bunter, he said quietly, do you recall the Colonel's will? It left everything to a cousin in Dorset, yes? Yes, my lord. A Captain R. Forstall. Except for the servant's bequests and a mention of a sealed letter to be opened in the event of unnatural death, which, of course, was never triggered. But suppose the Colonel feared something. Bunter nodded. And wrote that letter all the same. Precisely. Which makes me wonder what was in it, and whether someone removed it before it could cause trouble. Someone who has not quite finished. Whatever business they started down there in the cellar. And for the first time since arriving at Clenstone Hall, Lord Peter Wimsey's expression sharpened into something colder than wit. The arrival of Captain Robert Forstall at Clenstone Hall was as unceremonious as it was inevitable. The heavy rain that battered the leaded windows and sent sudden gusts rattling the weathered shutters seemed to Wimsey's mind an apt accompaniment to the entrance of a man whose presence promised to stir the murky waters of this otherwise staid household. The servant announced him shortly after luncheon. Wimsey, reclining in a well-worn leather chair by the fire, regarded the newcomer with his customary half-smile and arch brow. Captain Forstall was a man in his early 30s, tall and sinewy, with the alert posture of a soldier, and a face marked by a curious mixture of hard lines and the faintest trace of hesitancy. His clothes were impeccable, if somewhat austere, a plain-cut navy suit that spoke of no excess or extravagance, yet carried an air of discipline that brooked no nonsense. "Lord Wimsey," he said, inclining his head in a manner both respectful and measured, "thank you for receiving me on such short notice. I trust the journey was not too arduous." "Not at all, Captain," Wimsey replied smoothly. "The storms add a certain dramatic flair to our little drama, do they not? Pray, make yourself at home, though I imagine the particulars of your visit are less inclined toward hospitality and more toward business." Forstall smiled thinly. "Indeed. I come on the matter of my late cousin's affairs. It has been some time since I have been in the county, and I confess the news of his death was a shock. I hope to understand the circumstances better, and to ensure that his last wishes, whatever they might be, are honored." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "An admirable purpose. The Colonel was a man of many secrets, as you may have gathered, some of which, I fear, may have led to his untimely demise." The captain's expression hardened. "I had my suspicions. The letter you mentioned, his instructions regarding unnatural death, were you able to recover it?" Wimsey shook his head. "Alas, no. It seems to have vanished along with some other papers, which naturally raises the question of who might have an interest in concealing the truth." Forstall glanced briefly toward the window, where the rain had slackened to a persistent drizzle. "I understand that a Mr. Crane, a solicitor's agent from London, was seen here recently." "Correct," Wimsey confirmed, a man of chilly demeanor, who asked many questions but revealed little. "Have you any acquaintance with this Mr. Crane?" "For all my efforts, no. I had hoped to find him here, but he appears to be a ghost." "Ghosts abound in these parts, Captain, but I assure you, Mr. Crane is very much of the flesh, and likely to appear when least expected." Forstall laughed, though the sound was short and brittle. "I fear these halls conceal more than I bargained for." Wimsey's smile deepened. "Indeed. Now, if you would indulge me, I should like to hear of your cousin's recent days. Who among the household was close to him, and did you note any tensions or quarrels before his death?" Forstall's gaze darkened. The colonel was a man set in his ways, with few close friends. Miss Vetch, the housekeeper, was as much a fixture as the walls themselves, and the staff loyal, though perhaps a little wary of me. I sensed unease, but could not say if it was directed at me or something else. As for tensions, there was talk of a business dispute with a local landowner, and whispers about debts the colonel owed, but nothing concrete. Wimsey inclined his head. A business dispute might provide a motive, though the means and opportunity remain less clear. What of your cousin's movements on the evening in question? For the record, I arrived only yesterday, and the colonel was in good spirits when we dined together. He spoke little of his affairs, but hinted at concerns. Shadowy figures, he called them. I thought him fanciful. Shadows at dusk, Wimsey murmured, recalling the colonel's diary entry. Perhaps more literal than metaphorical. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp rap at the door. Bunter entered, bearing a folded newspaper. "A local paper, my lord. It arrived with the post this morning." Wimsey took it, scanning the headlines. Beneath the usual provincial fare, a small notice caught his eye. Disturbances at Clenston Hall. Unexplained cries reported. Local constabulary investigating. Curious, Wimsey mused aloud. The constabulary seemed less inclined to accept an accident as cause. Forstall frowned. That might be a sign of prudence or of suspicion. Both, Captain. Often two sides of the same coin. Now tell me, were you aware of the colonel's cellar excursions? The poetry recitations, no less. Forstall blinked. No, that is unusual, most unusual, a detail worth remembering. As the afternoon waned, Wimsey took a stroll through the house, accompanied by Forstall. Their footsteps echoed in the long corridors, punctuated by the occasional creak of settling timber. Passing the main hall, Wimsey paused before the grandfather clock, still frozen at 8 o'clock. "Time stopped here," Wimsey said softly. "Marking the hour of death, perhaps?" Forstall glanced at the clock and then toward the smaller one in the vestibule. "But they do not agree." "No, they do not. And therein lies the rub. One is an honest timekeeper, the other a deliberate deceiver. The question is, which is which?" Wimsey gestured toward the cellar door, its heavy oak frame scarred with age and secured by a formidable lock. This door was locked from the inside on the night of the colonel's death. Yet the colonel could not have locked himself in after the fatal injury, nor could he have escaped once the scream was heard. Something does not fit. Forstall ran a hand through his hair. A puzzle indeed. Wimsey's eyes gleamed. "Puzzles, Captain, are my preferred occupation. And yours, if I am not mistaken." A faint smile tugged at Forstall's lips. "I have dealt with enigmas before, though none quite so personal." Wimsey nodded approvingly. "Then we shall proceed together. But first, a word with Miss Vetch inside the kitchen." The housekeeper bustled among her duties, casting wary glances at the newcomers. "Miss Vetch," Wimsey began, "your knowledge of the house is invaluable. I wonder if you might indulge a few questions about the staff and their routines." She arched an eyebrow, but replied with a stiff nod. "Very well. I have learned that you personally wound the clocks. Is this true?" "Yes. It is my duty to keep order here. In every sense. Do you recall if the clocks were consistent on the night the colonel died?" "I have said all I know, Lord Wimsey. The clocks were as they always are. But that is the point, Miss Vetch. We now see they were not. Someone has tampered with them." Her composure faltered. "If you think me capable of such trickery, you are mistaken." Wimsey's tone softened. "I suspect no one here acts without reason. Tell me, who else might have access to the clocks, or to the cellar keys?" She hesitated. Only myself, the butler, Mr. Hawthorne, and the colonel. Mr. Hawthorne, Whimsy murmured. I think it is time we spoke to him again. Back in the drawing room, Mr. Hawthorne awaited, a faint pallor betraying his otherwise composed manner. Mr. Hawthorne, your duties have brought you into close contact with the colonel's affairs. Have you noticed any unusual behavior among the household? I have noticed, Lord Whimsy, that men are not always what they seem. Even those who serve can harbor secrets. Indeed. Would you say the colonel had any enemies here? Enemies. Number. But perhaps those uneasy with his plans. And what of the missing letter? The butler's gaze flickered. I do not know of any letter. Nor do I, Mr. Hawthorne. Yet the colonel believed such a document existed. A document concerning his unnatural death. Hawthorne swallowed hard. I only wish to serve truth and order, my lord. Then we must trust you to assist us in uncovering it. The room grew quiet, heavy with the unspoken. Whimsy rose, lifting his cane with a deft gesture. Captain Forstall, we have much to unravel, but I suspect the true key to this mystery lies not merely in who desired the colonel's estate, but in the shadows of his past and in the secrets he guarded beneath these very steps. Forstall nodded grimly. Then let us begin. As the evening drew near, the household braced for revelations to come, unaware that the night would hold more than whispered confessions. Perhaps a confrontation that would unsettle even Lord Peter Wimsey's famously unflappable composure. The long shadows lengthened and deepened as dusk settled over Clenstone Hall, the ancient timbers creaking under the weight of the gathering gloom. Whimsy and Captain Forstall returned to the drawing-room after their interviews, each man silent but keenly aware of the charged atmosphere that seemed to thicken the very air. The rain, now a steady drizzle, tapped a relentless rhythm on the windows, as if urging a swift resolution to this tangled affair. Whimsy, lighting a cigarette with deliberate grace, allowed the smoke to curl lazily before breaking the silence. It appears, Captain, that Clenstone Hall is less a bastion of genteel retirement and more a stage upon which old grievances and new ambitions collide. Forstall nodded, running a hand through his dark hair. Indeed. The colonel's business dealings, the curious tampering with the clocks, the missing letter, it all suggests someone here wishes to rewrite the story of his death. Precisely. And that rewriting is seldom done without a certain flair for the dramatic. Might I ask, have you noticed any peculiarities among the staff? Perhaps inconsistencies in their accounts or behaviors that betray more than they reveal? Forstall paused, reflecting. The housekeeper, Miss Vetch, was particularly guarded. Her insistence on control over the clocks and keys seemed, at the time, merely a display of her authority. But now, in light of recent discoveries, I wonder if it masks something deeper. Whimsy smiled faintly. Miss Vetch is a custodian not only of timepieces, but of secrets, it seems. We shall have occasion to revisit her shortly. Meanwhile, I have been pondering the question of the cellar itself. That heavy oak door, locked from the inside, if the colonel was incapacitated, how could he have secured himself within? Or was the lock manipulated to create an illusion? Forstall's eyes narrowed. A staged scene, then? To mislead the investigation. Exactly so. Our task is to discern the true sequence of events from the artful smoke. Let us consider the timelines anew. Whimsy unfolded a scrap of paper on which he had hastily jotted the known timings. The dinner hour, the colonel's last confirmed appearance, the scream heard by the housekeeper, the arrival of the constable. The clocks disagree by several minutes. One stopped at 8, the other runs 5 minutes fast. Such discrepancy is no accident. It suggests deliberate tampering to sow confusion. Forstall frowned. But who benefits? And how? Whimsy tapped his cigarette against the ashtray. That, dear Captain, is the question that will guide us to the culprit. Meanwhile, I propose a walk through the house at nightfall to see what shadows the evening might cast." They took their coats and lanterns, stepping into the chill air that clung to the stone walls. As they moved through the hallways, the stillness was punctuated by the faintest creak or whispered draught, each sound magnified in the quiet. At the foot of the cellar stairs, Whimsy paused, gesturing toward the lock. "Observe, the latch mechanism is complex, requiring 2 hands to secure. If the colonel was wounded, he could scarcely have done so himself. Someone else must have been inside, or they manipulated the lock from without." Forstall knelt, inspecting the door. "The lock's condition suggests recent use, but the key is missing. Could it have been pocketed by the perpetrator?" "A distinct possibility. Now, if you will follow me." They ascended the stairs and made their way to the study, where the colonel had spent his final hours. Whimsy examined the writing desk, noting a faint smudge on the blotter and a half-empty ink bottle. "Here, the letter must have been written, or perhaps deliberately destroyed, and this smudge suggests haste or concealment." Forstall looked over his shoulder, and yet no one has reported seeing this letter. It vanished before the constable arrived, precisely, which leads me to suspect an accomplice among the household, one with access and motive to hide such a document. Their scrutiny was interrupted by a sudden soft noise, a footstep from the corridor. Whimsy's eyes sharpened. "Ah, it seems the housekeeper herself approaches." Miss Vetch entered, her posture rigid, eyes alert. "I thought I might find you here, Lord Whimsy. There are matters I wish to discuss. By all means, Miss Vetch. Your insights are most welcome." She hesitated, then spoke in a low tone. The colonel was troubled in his last days. Not just by debts or disputes, but by something from long ago. A shadow he could not escape. Whimsy raised an eyebrow. "A shadow, you say? Does this relate to the so-called unnatural death letter?" She nodded. He feared betrayal. Among those closest to him, he spoke of secrets that might undo more than just his estate. Forstall exchanged a glance with Whimsy. Secrets within the family, perhaps? More than family, Captain. The colonel's past was intertwined with persons and places beyond this county, connections he kept tightly sealed. Whimsy tapped his chin thoughtfully. And yet those connections have manifested here in the form of a missing letter, tampered clocks, and a locked cellar. Miss Vetch, you say the colonel trusted few. To whom did he confide his fears? Her eyes flickered. Only to his closest servant, Hawthorne. But even he might not have grasped the full extent. Whimsy's expression darkened. Then Hawthorne's role demands further scrutiny. Miss Vetch's gaze dropped. "I do not wish to cast aspersions, my lord, but loyalties can be divided." Whimsy inclined his head. "Indeed. And sometimes divided loyalties make for the most dangerous deceptions." With that, Miss Vetch excused herself, leaving Whimsy and Forstall to their thoughts. "Captain," Whimsy said quietly, "our next step must be to revisit Mr. Hawthorne, armed with this new understanding. But I propose we also examine the staff's routines tonight, timings, keys, and the whereabouts of each individual when the colonel's scream rent the air." Forstall agreed, and together they moved to organize a discreet watch, hoping the night might yield clues hidden to the unobservant. The hours crept by, marked only by the distant hoot of an owl and the intermittent gusts shaking the rain-soaked eaves. Then, just past midnight, a sudden sound, a door closing sharply, footsteps on the gravel outside, alerted Whimsy. "Come, Captain," he whispered. "Let us see who prowls the shadows." They followed cautiously to the side entrance, where a figure cloaked in darkness hurried away toward the stables. Whimsy's voice cut through the stillness. "Halt!" "Who goes there?" The figure paused, then fled toward the woods. A brief pursuit ended with the stranger vanishing into the night. Returning to the house, Whimsy mused aloud, A nocturnal visitor, perhaps connected to the mystery, or a frightened servant seeking to avoid questions. Forstall shook his head. Whatever the truth, the night grows more complex, but so does the pattern. Indeed, Captain. And with every step, we approach the heart of this labyrinth. As the first light of dawn filtered weakly through leaded panes, Wimsey and Forstall prepared for the day ahead, their minds sharpened, the threads of intrigue pulling taut. In the shadows of Clenstone Hall, the game was far from over, and the greatest revelations yet awaited. The pallid light of morning cast a diffused glow over Clenstone Hall, lending the ancient estate an air of brittle vulnerability. Lord Peter Wimsey, having scarcely slept, found his thoughts turning with renewed insistence to the curious nocturnal visitor and the host of small inconsistencies now accumulating like shreds of paper blown about a deserted room. The house was stirring. Servants moved with the measured precision of those accustomed to quiet mornings disturbed only by the clatter of boots and the occasional ringing of bells. Yet beneath the surface, the undercurrent of tension was palpable. Captain Forstall and Wimsey convened once more in the drawing-room, the map of the estate and notes sprawled before them like a cartographer's challenge. "I confess," Wimsey remarked, tapping a finger against a corner of the paper, "the strange visitor's flight into the woods has complicated matters in a manner both irritating and intriguing. A gentleman fleeing in the dead of night is seldom innocent of something." Forstall, checking the alignment of the clocks again, murmured, "But no one on the estate admits to seeing anyone." The servants swear a strict vigil was kept, yet the sudden closing of the side door cannot be explained by any of the household's known movements. Which raises an immediate question. Was this figure a stranger, or someone known and masked by the darkness? I incline toward the latter. People tend to run when recognition is imminent, rather than for unknown pursuers. Wimsey's gaze drifted to the photographs scattered amid the papers. Portraits of the colonel, stern-faced and bearing the imprint of old military discipline. Hawthorne, the butler, prim and proper with an inscrutable expression. Miss Vetch, austere and watchful. "We must speak with Hawthorne again, but first," Wimsey continued, "let us examine the sequence of the colonel's final hours with renewed scrutiny." They retraced the day's events, beginning with the colonel's arrival from London, his interactions at the breakfast table, and the tense meeting with his nephew Charles. The recollections of the staff were consistent, though tinged with evident nervousness. The colonel had been preoccupied, checking and rechecking the clocks in the hall, muttering about discrepancies that others seemed to dismiss as eccentricity. "What puzzles me," Wimsey said, "is why the colonel, a man so meticulous about his schedule, would place such importance on these clocks. It seems trivial, until we consider the possibility that time itself was a weapon in the unfolding tragedy." Forstall nodded thoughtfully. "You mean the clocks were deliberately set wrong, to mislead someone?" "Precisely. The 5-minute difference between the main hall clock and the kitchen clock could easily create an alibi or confuse an investigation. Such a detail might mean the difference between guilt and innocence." Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Hawthorne, summoned discreetly by Wimsey's earlier instructions. The butler entered with the practiced grace of one accustomed to discretion, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of apprehension. "Mr. Hawthorne," Wimsey began, "I'm obliged to trouble you once more. You were the colonel's closest servant, and, naturally, you would have observed his habits more intimately than most." Hawthorne inclined his head slightly. "I endeavored to serve Colonel Clenston to the best of my ability, my lord." "Indeed. Might I inquire about your knowledge of the colonel's recent state of mind? He spoke of a letter, did he not?" The butler's lips thinned. "Yes, my lord. The colonel received a letter just days before his death. It was troubling, though he would not disclose its contents to me or any other member of the household." "And this letter," Wimsey pressed, "was it ever seen by others?" Hawthorne shook his head. "No, my lord. It was kept strictly private, Whimsy's eyes narrowed slightly. And yet it has vanished. The butler remained silent. Now, about the clocks, Whimsy said, changing tack. You were responsible for winding them, I believe. Correct, my lord. And the discrepancies between them? The hall clock running 5 minutes fast and the kitchen clock halted? Hawthorne's expression was unreadable. The hall clock has been temperamental of late. I noticed it gaining time, but attributed it to a mechanical fault. The kitchen clock stopped, I regret to say. Due to my neglect, Whimsy regarded him with a measured look. Curious indeed. The colonel himself was preoccupied with the clocks, checking them, repeatedly, insisting on their accuracy. It seems he suspected something amiss. Hawthorne's gaze faltered. He was a man with many worries. Whimsy pressed on. Tell me, Mr. Hawthorne, where were you at the time of the colonel's fatal scream? The butler's composure returned. In the servants' quarters, attending to routine matters. Alone? No, several staff members were present. Whimsy leaned forward slightly. And did any of these witnesses corroborate your presence? Hawthorne hesitated. I believe so. Very well. I shall verify with the others. One final question. Were you aware of any visitors to Clenstone Hall after dark? Hawthorne's eyes flickered to the door, then back. No, my lord. None that I know of. Whimsy rose. Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. You may go. As the butler left, Forstall turned to Whimsy. He strikes me as the epitome of loyalty, but something about his answers seems rehearsed. Ah, Captain, therein lies the art of detection, distinguishing the practiced mask from the flicker of genuine emotion. Whimsy's thoughts returned to the mysterious visitor and the locked cellar door. If the butler had indeed been elsewhere, then who had locked the door from the inside? The possibility of an accomplice within the household grew more plausible. He summoned Miss Vetch once again, requesting a list of all staff whereabouts on the evening in question, including exact timings. As the day wore on, the patterns emerged. Certain staff members had been unaccounted for during crucial intervals, their explanations vague or inconsistent. Among them was the stable hand, a wiry young man named Collins, whose nervous glances had not escaped Whimsy's notice. Whimsy and Forstall arranged a discreet inquiry into Collins' activities. The stable hand initially resisted, but the prospect of interrogation beneath Whimsy's penetrating gaze proved effective. Collins confessed to having left the stable late at night, claiming a sudden illness compelled him to seek fresh air. He denied any involvement with the colonel's death or the nocturnal visitor. Whimsy noted the man's clammy hands and shifting eyes. A minor prevarication, perhaps, he mused, or a significant concealment. Turning his attention to the colonel's private papers, Whimsy discovered a hidden drawer within the writing desk, expertly concealed beneath the veneer. Within lay an envelope marked only with the initials J.C. The contents were brief but telling. A letter from an unknown correspondent warning of blackmail and threats tied to a long-forgotten scandal involving the colonel's regiment in India. The letter spoke of restitution and silence, of secrets too dangerous to be revealed. Whimsy's mind raced. This added a new layer, motive grounded not merely in inheritance or petty grudges, but in fear and protection of reputation. Captain, he said quietly, the colonel's demise was no mere domestic tragedy. It is a tale woven from years of hidden shame and the desperate efforts to keep the past buried. Forstall nodded grimly. The question is, who wished to resurrect that past? And why now? Whimsy glanced toward the window, the autumn leaves swirling like whispers of secrets yet to surface. Soon we shall unravel the strands, for the fabric of deceit is both delicate and dangerous. With the pieces gathered yet not fully assembled, the two men prepared to delve deeper, each clue a step closer to the truth concealed within Clenstone Hall's shadows. The day waned, the low autumn sun casting long shadows across Clenstone Hall's weathered facade, as Lord Peter Wimsey and Captain Forstall convened once more in the dimly lit library. The atmosphere bore the weight of unspoken implications, like a canvas taut with tension and ready to snap. The fragmentary evidence, the enigmatic visitor, the contradictory alibis, the cryptic letter, had woven themselves into a tapestry of suspicion, yet the pattern remained elusive. Wimsey, perched gracefully in a high-backed chair, tapped his fingers against the mahogany armrest, eyes fixed on the map of the estate spread before him. The letter from this J.C., he mused aloud, raises the question of whether the past spectre has walked these halls in disguise. If the colonel feared exposure, then any visitor, or indeed any resident, might be acting out of desperation. Forstall, resting his chin on a fist, nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, but what puzzles me is the timing. Why strike now, when the colonel had only recently returned to Clenstone? The past may be ancient, but threats can be perennial. A most pertinent point, Wimsey agreed, and one that directs our attention to those who had both knowledge and opportunity. They fell into silence, pondering the servants' testimonies, each marked by reticence and a curious fixation on trivial details. How the curtains were drawn, who tended to the clocks, which door was left unlocked. These minutiae, while seemingly irrelevant, intrigued Wimsey, as did the particular behavior of Miss Vetch, whose vigilance bordered on obsessive. "I propose," Wimsey said suddenly, "that we revisit the accounts of that evening, focusing closely on the times given by each witness and cross-referencing them against the estate's clock settings. Therein, I suspect, lies our next clue." Forstall agreed, and together they compiled the timeline anew, charting movements with a precision that revealed small yet significant inconsistencies. The hall clock had indeed run 5 minutes fast, and the kitchen clock, curiously, had stopped at precisely 8:17 p.m., a detail overlooked by the household. "This kitchen clock," Wimsey remarked, "stopped during the time the colonel's fatal scream was heard, did it not?" "Precisely," Forstall confirmed, "and the kitchen staff insist they heard nothing untoward." A contradiction, then, that demanded explanation. Wimsey rose and moved toward the window, gazing at the neatly trimmed hedges and the shadowed silhouette of the cellar steps. "I would wager," he said thoughtfully, "that the kitchen silence is less a matter of hearing and more a matter of deliberate deafness." Forstall's brow furrowed. "You mean someone wanted the kitchen staff to hear nothing, or to believe they heard nothing?" Returning to the desk, Wimsey pulled open a drawer containing a ledger and carefully leafed through it. "There," he said, pointing to an entry dated a fortnight prior, a delivery of new curtains for the drawing-room. Miss Vetch mentioned the curtains several times during her interview. Forstall smiled wryly. One wonders why a single alteration to the decor merits such obsessive attention. Ah, but it is the nature of obsession that it finds significance in the smallest details, Wimsey replied. And I believe those curtains concealed more than just windows. Their thoughts turned again to the locked cellar door, which had been bolted from the inside, trapping an empty wine rack and silence within. The butler's insistence that no visitors had come after dark, combined with the visitor's flight into the night, suggested that the cellar might have served as a hiding place or a trap. "We must examine the cellar itself," Wimsey declared. "It may yet yield secrets." That evening, accompanied by Forstall and a reluctant Hawthorne, Wimsey descended the narrow steps into the cool, musty darkness of the cellar. The scent of aged oak and fermenting wine was thick in the air, mingling with a faint trace of damp stone and something more elusive, an undercurrent of neglect. The chamber was arranged with the precision of a cellar well used but recently disturbed. One of the wine racks was conspicuously empty, the dust disturbed around its edges. Wimsey knelt, inspecting the scuff marks on the floorboards near the empty rack. "This," he said softly, Suggests the removal of a heavy object, or perhaps someone crawling through. Hawthorne's face paled. I assure you, my lord, no one should have been here after hours. For your own sake, I hope that is true, Wimsey replied dryly. From a shelf, Wimsey extracted a small vial of clear liquid and held it to the light. Not brandy, I believe. Forstall peered curiously. What then? Prussic acid. A poison, subtle and swift. Wimsey's voice dropped. If the colonel's death was not the result of blunt force, it might have been administered here, concealed beneath the guise of an accident or natural causes. Hawthorne's composure cracked. Impossible. The colonel was hale and hearty but for his concerns over that letter. Yet concerns can be fatal, Mr. Hawthorne. Fear, when combined with desperation, leads men to strange ends. Emerging from the cellar, Wimsey set his mind to the letters, the timeline, and the household's intricate dance of loyalties and deceit. The visitor's mysterious identity, the locked cellar, the stopped clock, and the poison all painted a portrait of premeditation. That night, Wimsey requested access to the colonel's private quarters once more, determined to uncover any further correspondence or clues that might illuminate the motive. In the study, he methodically examined every drawer and shelf, until his eyes caught sight of a small leather-bound notebook hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Its pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting. A diary. Reading silently, Wimsey discovered entries chronicling the colonel's mounting anxiety. References to the shadow of J.C., to the debts of honor, and to a deal made in darkness, hinted at a past entanglement fraught with peril. One entry, dated the day before the colonel's death, contained a cryptic passage. Must confront the past tomorrow. No choice but to meet the blackmailer at Clenstone. Trust no one. Time is of the essence. Wimsey folded the diary carefully. The colonel intended to face his adversary, here, on his own ground. Forstall stepped in, his voice low. Then the visitor was no random prowler, but the blackmailer himself. Or herself. Precisely. And this explains the desperate measures taken, the locked cellar, the attempted concealment of evidence, the contradictory alibis. But what of the poison? Forstall queried. An insurance policy, perhaps. A means to silence if threats escalated. As dawn approached, Wimsey's thoughts coalesced into a tentative theory. The killer had to be someone within the household, or with intimate access, armed with knowledge of the colonel's fears, with motive intertwined with loyalty and fear. Yet the question remained, who was J.C.? The initials, combined with the personal tone of the letters and diary entries, suggested a man or woman known to the colonel, someone from the past who had both reason and opportunity. Wimsey resolved to interrogate Miss Vetch once more, suspecting her vigilant watchfulness masked a deeper connection. The vicar's sister, when confronted, admitted to an acquaintance with a Colonel James Cresswell, an old comrade of the colonel, with whom Clenston had once shared a bitter dispute over an inheritance and honor. The quarrel was long settled, or so I believed, Miss Vetch confessed, but the arrival of this letter seemed to rekindle old wounds. Wimsey smiled thinly. Old wounds often fester unseen, and in this house they have become poison. As the day broke over Clenstone Hall, the investigation entered a new phase. The past, no longer a mere shadow, had stepped into the light, and Wimsey prepared to navigate the labyrinth of grudges, secrets, and subtle betrayals that would lead to the heart of the crime. The lingering twilight of the drawing-room was scarcely sufficient to dispel the shadows gathered beneath the heavy curtains, their once rich damask now dulled by the dust of years and neglect. Lord Peter Wimsey, seated comfortably with an air of unruffled curiosity, contemplated the quiet figure before him. Miss Vetch, the vicar's sister, whose zeal in tending the household's minutiae had begun to seem less innocent than mere fastidiousness. Her eyes, cast downward, betrayed a flicker of something between anxiety and resolve, an emotional complexity that rarely escaped Wimsey's practiced gaze. "It appears, Miss Vetch," Wimsey began gently, "that your acquaintance with Colonel James Cresswell is more than a passing one. Might I trouble you to enlighten me further on this gentleman's nature and his relation to our late colonel?" She hesitated, biting her lip, before speaking in a voice almost too quiet for the grand room's vastness. "Colonel Cresswell and my brother's late husband, your colonel, had a history of friendship, yes, and, regrettably, of rivalry. There was a dispute many years past regarding the Beauchamp estate, an inheritance matter that soured their camaraderie." Wimsey nodded, steepling his fingers. Inheritance disputes have a habit of leaving scars deeper than mere words can mend. "And do you know if this quarrel was ever truly resolved? Or perhaps simply buried beneath polite society's veneer?" She exhaled sharply, a small bitter laugh escaping her. "Polite society, Lord Peter, has no patience for old wounds, but the shadows remain all the same. The letter the colonel received, the one signed with the initials J.C., it stirred these old grievances. The colonel feared exposure, or worse, blackmail. I believe he intended to confront this visitor himself, despite my warnings." "Ah, confrontation, a dangerous enterprise, particularly when the stakes are as high as one's honor and livelihood," Wimsey observed, turning over the implications. "And yet the letter's provenance and timing remain curiosities. Miss Vetch, were you aware of this letter prior to its delivery?" "No," she answered quickly, then faltered. "I was not until after the colonel's death. But I confessed to intercepting a visitor the night before. A man arrived unexpectedly, requesting to see the colonel. I allowed him passage, but only briefly. I did not know his name, only that he was grave and insistent." "Indeed," Wimsey murmured, eyes narrowing with interest. "Your vigilance is commendable, but might it not have been prudent to inform the household, or the authorities? Fearful, perhaps, that it might provoke my brother's husband, or endanger us all," she replied. "Forgive me, Lord Peter. I did what I thought best." Wimsey inclined his head, not unkindly. "Sometimes the best intentions lead us down the most tortuous paths." He rose, pacing toward the window, the soft creak of the floorboards a reminder of the house's age and secrets. "Miss Vetch, your information confirms our suspicions. The visitor, the blackmailer, must be linked intimately to the colonel's past, yet the identity remains elusive. We know the initials J.C. and we know the vendetta over Beauchamp. The question is, which side of the old quarrel did this mysterious figure inhabit, and what exactly did he or she hope to achieve?" Her eyes met his, shining with newfound determination. "I believe the visitor sought to reclaim something lost, a reputation, a legacy, perhaps even a portion of the estate." "Reclamation through intimidation," Wimsey mused, "a powerful motive indeed. But it leaves us with a puzzle. The method of murder, the timing, the poisoned vial found in the cellar. Our visitor was no mere envoy, but an assassin who planned with ruthless precision." As the conversation drew to a close, Wimsey's thoughts turned once again to the intricate timeline in the household's habits. The kitchen clock, stopped at 8:17 p.m., was a linchpin in the unfolding mystery, its silence a signal rather than a mere accident. He recalled Miss Vetch's insistence that the kitchen staff heard nothing which suggested complicity or ignorance born of intimidation. Determined to explore this avenue, Wimsey summoned the cook, Mrs. Brangwyn, an imposing woman with hands shaped by decades of toil and a face both stern and unyielding. In her kitchen domain, surrounded by the scent of roasted meats and stale grease, she was a figure of authority as much as of servitude. "Mrs. Brangwyn," Wimsey began, "might I trouble you regarding the kitchen clock's peculiar behavior on the evening of the colonel's death?" The cook's expression hardened. I don't see what good it will do, my lord." The clock stopped, as clocks will, but no harm came of it. "Indeed," Whimsy said with a faint smile, "though a stopped clock tells us not only time, but sometimes secrets. Were there any unusual occurrences in the kitchen at that hour? Unusual visitors, noises, or instructions?" She hesitated briefly. "Only that the footman, Jenkins, seemed nervous that evening. He kept glancing over his shoulder, and when the colonel cried out, he was nowhere to be seen." "And where was Jenkins, do you suppose?" Mrs. Brangwyn sniffed. "Might have been in the cellar, though I can't say for certain." "He's a slippery one," that boy intrigued. Whimsy asked for Jenkins to be brought before him. The youth appeared pale and agitated, avoiding the detective's gaze as if expecting reproach. "Jenkins," Whimsy said gently, "your timing that night is most curious. You were absent when your master cried out. How do you account for that?" The footman swallowed hard. I was tending to the cellar, my lord. I was moving some barrels when I heard the scream. I tried to find the colonel, but the cellar door was locked. "A locked door in the cellar," Whimsy echoed, "which was bolted from the inside?" Jenkins nodded, nervously wringing his cap. "Yes, sir. I thought it odd, but I couldn't open it." "Did you see anyone else in the cellar?" "No, sir. Only the colonel's shadow as he went down." "And the vial of poison?" Whimsy pressed. Jenkins paled further. "I swear, my lord, I know nothing of that." Whimsy studied him a moment longer, then shifted focus. "Tell me about the curtains in the drawing room. You have been observed paying unusual attention to them." The youth blinked, clearly caught off guard. I was asked to install the new curtains, sir. They're heavier than the old ones. Block out more light and sound." "Indeed," Whimsy murmured. "A soundproofing measure, perhaps?" "Yes, sir," Jenkins replied, now visibly uneasy. "Miss Vetch insisted they be put up quickly." The detective made a note of this, then thanked the footman and sent him away. As the evening deepened, Whimsy retreated to his quarters, piecing together the threads of soundproof curtains, the locked cellar, and the secretive visitor. The temporal discrepancies, the psychological undercurrents of fear and loyalty, and the physical evidence now suggested a carefully orchestrated attempt to control not only the colonel's movements, but the very environment in which he lived. Yet, a nagging question remained. Who had the most to gain by such meticulous planning, and was that person hidden behind a mask of civility? Whimsy's mind circled back to the blackmailer's initials, J.C., and the old quarrel that had shadowed Clenstone Hall for years. If the visitor was indeed James Cresswell or another person with those initials, what could have been the nature of their final encounter? And why, despite this, did the visitor flee rather than complete whatever bargain was to be struck? Before sleep could claim him, Whimsy resolved to examine the visitor's route, retracing the path from the estate gates to the surrounding village. The shadows of Clenstone were long, but he suspected the truth would be revealed not in grand gestures, but in the most inconspicuous details: a misplaced footstep, a misaligned clock, a forgotten scarf. Tomorrow, the investigation would delve deeper into these shadows, and with each step, Whimsy would draw closer to unmasking the killer who had turned a cry from the cellar steps into a chilling silence. The first light of dawn crept hesitantly through the mullioned windows of Clenstone Hall, casting a pale glow upon the worn carpets and the faint traces of yesterday's turmoil. Lord Peter Whimsy, as invariably was his wont, had risen early, not for exercise or leisure, but to pursue the subtle nuances that daylight revealed, those small but telling details that lurked just beyond the reach of human recollection in the dark hours. His plan for the easy morning was simple yet methodical: to walk the visitor's path from the estate gates through the village precisely as they must have done on the night in question, noting distances, possible concealments, and all manner of distractions that might have allowed an intruder or courier to move unnoticed. The countryside, with its mist clinging stubbornly to the hedgerows, seemed to hold its breath as if aware that its secrets were about to be wrested from its grasp. Whimsy's first step was to consult the butler, Mr. Hargreaves, a man whose experience and taciturn manner made him a repository of invaluable knowledge about Clenston's daily rhythms. The butler reported that the visitor had indeed arrived on foot, passing through the iron gates at exactly 7:50 p.m., according to the gatekeeper's recollection. The gatekeeper, a wiry old man named Thatcher, had been engaged in an evening task of oiling the hinges, and thus had the opportunity to observe the figure carefully. The visitor, tall, cloaked in a dark overcoat, and moving with deliberate pace, did not halt at the lodge but proceeded directly toward the house, entering through the side door seldom used by guests but frequented by servants. This was the first puzzle piece. The side door was always kept locked, yet it had been opened that evening, either by an accomplice within or by a visitor in possession of a key. Whimsy filed this away mentally, noting that the uninvited visitor's access must have involved prior knowledge of the estate's internal workings. The path from the side gate to the cellar was less direct than it appeared on the map. It wound through the stable yard, past the servants' quarters, and behind the kitchen garden, a convoluted route that might explain Jenkins's presence in the cellar at the critical hour. A question began to crystallize. Was Jenkins merely performing his duties, or was he an unwilling participant in a larger design? Whimsy's next stop was the village itself, a quaint cluster of cottages and shops whose residents were as steeped in routine as the manor's inhabitants. His presence there was met with the usual mixture of curiosity and reticence. Rural folk, even in their geniality, guard their peace jealously and resent unwelcome scrutiny. His inquiry focused on the inn, the Silver Stag, where the visitor might have paused, and on the local post office, which was the hub of communication and gossip. A bartender, a broad-shouldered man with an ingrained suspicion of outsiders, recalled a man matching the visitor's description ordering a whiskey shortly after 7:30 p.m. and paying in cash, leaving without much conversation. The postmistress, a sprightly woman with a penchant for sharp observation, mentioned receiving a letter from a J.C. just the day prior, addressed ambiguously to the Colonel's conscience. The correspondence had aroused much speculation. The postmistress, Mrs. Purcell, suggested that such letters were rare but not unheard of in Clainstone, and that blackmail was a whispered undercurrent among the well-to-do families, an unspoken but persistent menace. Whimsy, however, saw something more precise in this detail. The letter's timing, the visitor's cash payment, the clandestine entry, all parts of a carefully staged performance designed to unsettle rather than inform. Returning to the manor, Whimsy focused once more on the soundproof curtains in the drawing room. The installation of such heavy drapery was unusual for a household of this standing, and even more so in a room meant to welcome guests and public scrutiny. Miss Vetch's insistence on the curtain's rapid placement suggested a desire to muffle more than just sound. It hinted at a concealed action or conversation. Inspecting the curtains, Whimsy noted their thickness and density, qualities that would deaden the slightest murmur. But the seams bore an irregularity, a small slit, nearly invisible unless one looked closely, which could serve as a narrow aperture for observation or discreet communication. This discovery prompted a visit to the drawing-room itself, where Whimsy reconstructed the scene as it might have been on the fatal night. The Colonel's favorite armchair remained slightly askew, and on the floor a faint depression in the carpet suggested someone had been kneeling or crouching, perhaps the visitor, or even the Colonel himself, engaging in a secretive act hidden from the household's prying eyes. It was here, in this calculated seclusion, that Whimsy sensed the heart of the mystery. The visitor's purpose was not only to confront the Colonel, but to force disclosure, or perhaps to retrieve an object hidden within this very chamber. But what? His contemplation was interrupted by a sudden recollection. the missing salver. The ornate silver tray, usually displayed prominently in the sideboard, was nowhere to be found. Its absence had been noted but dismissed as careless housekeeping. Yet now it took on sinister significance. The salver, a family heirloom engraved with the Beauchamp crest, might have been the object the visitor sought, either as leverage or as a symbol. Whimsy made a mental note to question the household further on its whereabouts and any recent disturbances involving it. Next, the timeline required re-examination. If the visitor arrived at 7:50 p.m. and the Colonel's cry was heard at 8:15 p.m., the sequence of events was tight but plausible for a confrontation escalating to violence. The locked cellar door, however, suggested premeditation. Someone had ensured the Colonel's isolation. Whimsy surmised that the visitor had either lured the Colonel to the cellar under false pretenses or forced him there for a confrontation. The soundproof curtains in the secluded room pointed to a secret exchange, possibly involving the salver or the contents of a letter. What unsettled Whimsy most was the calculated silence of the servants. Their repeated claims of ignorance felt rehearsed, and the timing of Jenkins' absence in particular begged closer scrutiny. Had Jenkins been coerced? Had he played a more active role than he admitted? To unravel this, Whimsy resolved to interview Jenkins once again, this time away from the intimidating presence of the household staff and under less formal circumstances. A gentleman's approach, combined with subtle psychological pressure, might loosen the boy's tongue. The interview revealed Jenkins's nervousness, but also a grudging loyalty to Miss Vetch. It emerged that Jenkins had been instructed to prepare the cellar for a wine-tasting event the following week. A seemingly innocuous task, but one that explained the barrels and his unusual presence. Yet the locked door remained a mystery. Pressing Jenkins, Whimsy discovered that Miss Vetch had a key to the cellar, a fact she had not previously disclosed. The implications were clear. She could have confined the Colonel, either knowingly or under duress. Confronted with this, Jenkins admitted that the lock was often used to prevent servants or visitors from entering prematurely. But on that night, Miss Vetch had appeared agitated and insistent on securing the door. This newfound knowledge shifted suspicion squarely onto Miss Vetch. Her earlier evasions, the curtains, the cellar key, all suggested a deeper involvement. However, Whimsy was wary of jumping to conclusions. The psychological underpinnings were complex. Jealousy, fear, protection. Was Miss Vetch shielding a guilty party or acting out of misguided loyalty? The final piece fell into place when Whimsy examined the Colonel's personal papers. Among them, he found a hidden compartment in the writing desk containing letters, not only from J.C., but also from an unknown correspondent, pleading for silence and hinting at a scandal long buried. The threads wove together. A blackmail scheme, an inheritance dispute, the missing salver, and a household bristling with secrets. Yet the question remained, who had poisoned the Colonel, and why had the visitor fled before the deed was done? Whimsy's mind returned to the slit in the curtains and the faint depression in the carpet. There had been more than one observer that night, perhaps a silent accomplice hidden behind the facade of service or devotion. The answer lay not in grand gestures, but in the small, overlooked details, the timing of a footstep, the alignment of a clock, the tension in a servant's glance. With the day advancing, Whimsy prepared to set his plan in motion, a careful recreation of the night's events, to catch the unseen player in the act. For in the quiet, calculated realm of Clenstone Hall, the devil, as ever, was in the details. The evening shadows lengthened over Clenstone Hall as Lord Peter Whimsy took his customary seat by the drawing-room fire, the weight of accumulated observations settling into a quiet intensity. The hour was ripe for his impending demonstration, one calculated to draw forth the invisible threads binding the night's dark tapestry. His audience would be limited, yet crucial, those whose roles had been deemed peripheral, but whose very presence that night was anything but incidental. The colonel's study had been meticulously prepared, every item restored to its prior position to the minutest detail, down to the subtle crease in the Persian rug and the barely perceptible tilt of the armchair's upholstery. The heavy velvet curtains, with their clandestine slit, were drawn precisely as on the fatal evening. A clock on the mantelpiece was adjusted to the moment of the visitor's arrival, its hands frozen as a silent sentinel to time's cruel calculus. Guests assembled with a certain wary curiosity. Miss Vetch, pale but composed, maintained her usual decorum, though an undercurrent of tension betrayed her otherwise placid exterior. Jenkins hovered discreetly near the door, casting furtive glances at the assembled company. Mrs. Purcell, the postmistress, and Mr. Hargreaves, the butler, were also present, each an integral witness in the web of testimony and silence. Whimsy, with a smile that blended geniality and the faintest trace of sardonic irony, addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for indulging this curious exercise, but I assure you the night's events demand no less than a full re-examination under the strictest conditions. It is the minutiae that reveal the most, and in our case, the murderer's mask may slip in the smallest, most overlooked moment." His gaze settled on Miss Vetch. "You, madam, had the key to the cellar door. A fact not lightly admitted. Would you care to explain why?" She shifted uneasily, fingers tightening on the edge of her chair. "It is true, Lord Peter. The cellar door was kept locked to protect the wine. I never imagined it would become part of such a dreadful matter, a prudent precaution certainly. Yet the timing of your securing that door, coincident with the colonel's cry, demands elucidation." Miss Vetch's eyes flickered to Jenkins, who was now standing a little straighter, as if encouraged to speak. "Sir," Jenkins began haltingly, "Miss Vetch asked me to prepare the cellar for the tasting, as I said before, but she also said to keep it locked, to stop anyone from entering until she said so." Whimsy nodded. And yet the colonel was confined there, unable to summon aid. Who else possessed access to the key? The room fell into a brief, brittle silence before Mr. Hargreaves spoke, his voice measured and cool. "Only Miss Vetch and the colonel himself, to my knowledge." "Indeed," Whimsy replied, but the colonel was in no condition to lock the door from the inside, and it was found secured when the household gathered. He paused, allowing the implications to settle. Thus the question arises: who locked it after the visitor's arrival? Miss Vetch, swallowing her anxiety, ventured, I was in the drawing-room, as you have said. I did not leave until much later. Your presence there was noted," Whimsy acknowledged, "but the critical moments demand scrutiny beyond mere presence. Tell me, what of the salver? Where is it?" A flicker of recognition crossed Miss Vetch's face, quickly suppressed. "I do not know. It was here the morning after, but it was missing during the evening." "Precisely," Whimsy observed. "Its absence suggests it was the object of the visitor's search, or a trophy to be concealed. Miss Vetch, I am compelled to ask if you sought to protect it, or to hide something darker." The color drained from her cheeks. "I cannot say. I only know the colonel was troubled, more so than he admitted." Whimsy's eyes narrowed, turning now to Jenkins. "Your recollection is vital, Jenkins. Did you notice anyone moving about the corridors after the visitor's arrival?" The youth hesitated, then said, "I thought I heard footsteps, soft but hurried, near the library." "But I could not see who a second presence," Whimsy mused, "one unaccounted for and silent enough to evade notice. A crucial observation." He motioned toward Mrs. Purcell. "And you, madam, the letter from J.C. Do you know of this person?" Mrs. Purcell's lips pressed thin. No one in the village admits to knowing J.C., but whispers link the initials to a disgraced relative of the colonel, one long estranged and rumored to seek recompense. "An avenger or an opportunist," Whimsy mused aloud. "Either might drive the desperate acts we suspect." At this, Miss Vetch suddenly spoke, her voice steadier. "If I may, Lord Peter." The colonel kept certain letters hidden, letters not merely blackmail, but confession, of debts owed and betrayals committed long ago. He feared exposure, a motive most human, Wimsey remarked, and one that might provoke fear enough to silence. He rose and paced slowly, his hands behind his back. Now consider the timeline once more. The visitor arrives, gains entry through the side door, moves silently through the servants' quarters, perhaps to the drawing-room or the cellar. The colonel's cry rings out shortly after. The cellar door is locked, the salver missing, and a second figure moves unseen. Turning sharply, Wimsey addressed them all. "One of you has played a part in this sequence, whether by design or fear. The clues are subtle, the slit in the curtains allowing clandestine communication, the missing salver, a family heirloom perhaps used as leverage, the soundproofing concealing the final moments, his gaze fixed on Miss Vetch again. Your agitation, the secret key, the withheld truth. It all points here." Miss Vetch's composure cracked. "I only wanted to protect the colonel. His past was a shadow over us all. I did not kill him." "Then who did?" The room held its breath. Jenkins, emboldened by the tension, blurted, "There was someone else, Miss Vetch's brother. He came that night, angry and desperate. I heard voices, harsh words." Then the door slammed. A gasp swept through the assembled company. Miss Vetch's eyes widened in horror. "My brother!" "But he left years ago. He was not to return." Wimsey nodded. "A return to settle old scores, perhaps. A man desperate enough to strike a fatal blow. The missing salver could have been taken to ransom or to prove a claim." He turned toward the window, gazing into the encroaching dusk. The shadows lengthen, but truth begins to emerge from their depths. We have the name and motive of a shadowy figure, one who manipulated the household's fears and used silence as his weapon. "Then what now, Lord Peter?" Mrs. Purcell asked softly. "We wait," Wimsey said, his tone final yet expectant. "And we watch. For the man who sought to haunt Clenston with secrets will make his next move, and when he does, the night will speak once more." As the fire flickered low, the uneasy peace of Clenston Hall held its breath, poised on the cusp of revelation and ruin. The next morning arrived grey and damp, as if the heavens themselves were reluctant to face the revelations that lay ahead at Clenston Hall. Lord Peter Wimsey, having spent a restless night pondering the threads unravelled in the drawing-room tableau, was now ready to press forward with his inquiry. The subtleties of human nature and the intricacies of social facades had long been his favoured terrain, and he was about to step once more into that shadowed territory with a precise and unyielding purpose. The household was gathered, albeit under an atmosphere far less convivial than that of the previous evening's recreation. Each individual bore the weight of suspicion and self-preservation with varying degrees of fortitude. Miss Vetch's countenance was drawn but resolute. Jenkins appeared distracted, as though every movement might herald a new revelation. Mrs. Purcell maintained her usual composure, but with an edge of quiet anxiety, and Mr. Hargreaves, ever the inscrutable butler, stood with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes unreadable. Wimsey commenced with a question that might have seemed innocuous, but was, in fact, a masterstroke in his methodical dismantling of alibis and half-truths. "I wish to revisit the matter of soundproofing," he said, glancing at Mr. Hargreaves. "You mentioned the cellar was particularly well insulated to protect the vintages and preserve silence during the evening gatherings. Could you confirm for us the degree to which sounds from within the cellar might, or might not, carry to the upper rooms?" Mr. Hargreaves inclined his head slightly. "The cellar is beneath the east wing, Lord Peter, with thick stone walls and a heavy oak door lined with felt. It is indeed designed to keep both sound and temperature consistent. From the upper floors it would be difficult to discern voices or noises from within, unless one stood immediately over the stairwell. Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. And yet it was the Colonel's cry, a single, sharp exclamation, that was heard by several witnesses. How does one reconcile this? Mrs. Purcell, who had been silent, interjected. The cry was brief and sudden, like a startled call rather than a prolonged shout. It could have escaped through the door or a nearby window left slightly ajar. Ah, yes, Wimsey agreed, the window. He turned to Miss Vetch. You mentioned the slit in the curtain adjacent to the cellar window. Was the window open that evening? Miss Vetch hesitated, then admitted. Yes, it was. The evening was warm and the air stale below. I thought to let in some fresh breeze before the tasting. An unfortunate decision, Wimsey remarked dryly, for it permitted sound to escape and, quite possibly, unwanted observers to peer in. Jenkins' expression shifted suddenly. That window, the one in the cellar, I saw something strange about it last night. The latch was loosened, but it did not appear forced. It seemed as if someone had opened it from the inside, then shut it carefully. A subtle detail, Wimsey noted approvingly. One that suggests the Colonel, or his assailant, might have used it to communicate or even to attempt escape. He paused, allowing the thought to settle, which raises another point. If the Colonel was locked inside and the door barred, could this window have served as a point of ingress or egress? Miss Vetch looked startled. I never considered it, but the cellar opens into the garden through a small courtyard. Precisely. And the garden, of course, abuts the woods. An ideal place for an intruder to vanish unseen. The assembled company exchanged uneasy glances. Wimsey moved closer to the window, tracing the contours of the heavy frame. A crime staged with the precision of a theatre director, yet marked by human folly in the smallest gesture. The salver, the locked door, the open window, each a deliberate stroke in a grisly tableau. He turned abruptly to Mrs. Purcell. Madame, you spoke of J.C. and the disgraced relative. Might this person have known of the cellar's secret entrance? Mrs. Purcell's gaze dropped. It is whispered, yes, though no one admits to direct knowledge. The Colonel kept many secrets, but some were bound too tightly by blood to be easily broken. And blood often begets more than mere inheritance disputes, Wimsey mused. It breeds grudges that fester beneath the veneer of civility. Miss Vetch suddenly blurted, I must confess something. The night of the murder, my brother did come, unannounced, furious. He demanded to see the Colonel, claiming old debts and betrayals. I begged him to leave, but he would not listen. Wimsey fixed her with a keen glance. And you did not inform anyone else? I was ashamed, fearful. I wanted to protect the Colonel's reputation. I thought to handle it myself. And your brother. What became of him that night? I saw him leave, but later I heard the Colonel's cry. When the household gathered, he was gone. A charged silence followed. Wimsey spoke softly. Your brother's departure, though clandestine, places him squarely within the time frame of the murder. Yet, as Jenkins heard, a second presence lurked, a shadow within shadows. He turned to Jenkins, who looked uncomfortable under the scrutiny. Young man, have you considered the possibility that this second presence was not a stranger, but someone within these very walls? Jenkins swallowed, then nodded. It would explain the ease of movement and the knowledge of the household's routines. Wimsey's eyes sparkled with the hint of a smile. Indeed. A familiar stranger, the most dangerous kind, he paced thoughtfully, connecting disparate details with the deftness of a master craftsman. The missing salver, the secret letters, the open window, the cellar's soundproofing, the estranged brother, all are pieces of a larger puzzle, yet the most telling clue lies not in what was taken, but in what was left behind. He turned to face the room. I speak of the subtle disarray in the Colonel's study, an overturned ink pot, a crumpled page, the faint scent of lavender. These speak not of a struggle, but of desperation and betrayal. Miss Vetch's eyes widened. Lavender. That is my sister's scent. A tremor passed through the room. Wimsey's voice dropped to a conspiratorial tone. And so, the mystery deepens. A sister who scented the air, a brother who raged, a house full of secrets, and a victim silenced before his confessions could reach daylight. He paused, then added quietly, "The final act approaches, and with it, the truth awaits unmasking." As the grey light of morning filtered through the windows, the assembled company felt the inexorable tightening of the net woven by Lord Peter Wimsey's intellect. A net that would soon reveal who among them had the courage to confront the past, and who was doomed to be ensnared by it. The drawing-room of Clenstone Hall was thick with the expectant silence of a stage before the curtain rose. The household, once a tapestry of half-uttered suspicions and furtive glances, now sat assembled, each player awaiting the denouement that Lord Peter Wimsey was, with his habitual theatrical flair, preparing to deliver. Wimsey rose from his chair, the faintest smirk curling at the corner of his mouth, as if privy to a private joke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice calm but authoritative, "we have traversed a labyrinth of deception, shadows, and human frailty. Tonight, I intend to guide you from darkness into light." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The tragedy of Colonel Feltham's death is not the product of a stranger's malice, nor the caprice of fate, but rather the consequence of a carefully orchestrated act, a drama born of desperation and concealed truth. Wimsey's eyes rested on Miss Vetch. "Your brother, the tempestuous visitor, though initially suspicious, was but a distraction, a red herring summoned to divert our gaze." He turned toward Jenkins, the young footman whose nervous energy had not escaped his notice. "Jenkins, your quiet observation of the open cellar window was most astute. The method of entry and exit was not brute force, but subtle manipulation, an intimate knowledge of the house's hidden passages, specifically the servants' corridor connecting the east wing to the cellar." The room stirred. Wimsey raised a hand for silence. This passageway, known only to the staff and those trusted by the colonel, was the true stage for our crime. He approached the fireplace, from which he plucked a crumpled piece of lavender-scented paper. The scent of lavender, a detail seemingly trivial, leads us to the key player, Mrs. Purcell. Gasps rippled among the listeners. "Your genteel facade masks a depth of involvement far beyond that of a mere housekeeper," Wimsey continued. "You, Mrs. Purcell, shared a history with the colonel, one of secret correspondence, unfulfilled promises, and mutual betrayal. The letters found, though missing from the study, were safeguarded here." He gestured to a nearby cabinet where the recovered correspondence lay. "When the colonel confronted you, seeking to end this chapter and protect his reputation, you acted, not in cold blood, but in anguished self-preservation." Mrs. Purcell's composure faltered, a flicker of defiance replaced by resignation. "The cry from the cellar steps was your desperate plea, Mrs. Purcell, not for help, but for silence. Your knowledge of the cellar's soundproofing and the secret window allowed you to stage the scene, confident the truth would remain hidden." Wimsey's gaze softened just perceptibly. A tragic figure ensnared by loyalty, guilt, and fear, a reminder that even the most genteel among us can be driven to extremes when love and betrayal intertwine. He turned to the assembled group. "Thus, the puzzle pieces align. The open window, the secret corridor, the lavender scent, the missing letters, and the carefully timed visits all converge upon Mrs. Purcell's hand." She lowered her gaze, the mask of innocence finally shattered. Wimsey concluded with a wry smile. "Justice, as always, is served not by spectacle, but by quiet reason. And in this case, by the steady hand and inquisitive mind of one who appreciates the delicate balance between truth and human frailty." As the household absorbed the revelation, Lord Peter Wimsey lit a cigar and mused aloud. One might say the devil is indeed in the details, or perhaps in the scent of lavender. With that, he tipped his hat, leaving the room thick with astonishment and the melancholy residue of secrets laid bare.